Raquel, the relation we have built in the years and your commitment to Oscar. On behalf of the political prisoners and everybody else that has been part of this campaign, truly thank you for the excellent contact here and sense of awareness. I really don't know. It's kind of hard for me to start where is it that I would start talking about Puerto Rico. And I had talked to a few of the guests right before that I started, before I started talking, and give me an idea of what is that. And some of them, the ones that I talk, are very, very much aware of Oscar. Many of them have been part of the five of the Cubans, and they were very victorious in bringing them back home. First of all, especially for the youngsters, let me start from the beginning. So Puerto Rico is known everywhere, as they say, as a Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, of the United States. In Spanish, it's translated Estado Libre Asociado. The translation is a state free and associated. Those three terms, of course, is a contradiction of terminology. There's no possible way that a country can be free, associated, and a state at the same time. In English, it's called Commonwealth, and of course, Puerto Rico is not a Commonwealth because all Commonwealths first have to become an independent nation and then decide to be part of another nation. Such is the case with Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, where both are Commonwealths. So basically, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. Colonialism on an international level is an international crime, and it's a crime against humanity. So no colony, no nation should be a colony. And a great example of colonialism will probably be that United States was originally a colony. They called it 13 colonies, right? And what happened in 1776 for you guys?
History class, guys.
What happened in 1776?
Sorry.
The United States achieved its independence against colonialism, against Britain, okay? And ever since that, it's been known historically that colonialism is a crime against humanity. That has not changed. A lot of world powers still maintain colonies in their power. In the case of Puerto Rico, if we look at it historically, the natives that were there were called the Taino Indians. In 1493, Spain invades Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico becomes a colony of Spain since 1493. In 1998, after the Spanish-American War, United States gives, Spain gives United States Puerto Rico, but that was illegal because Puerto Rico had a charter of autonomy. It already was in its roads of independence. It was not accepted, but then United States came in and invaded Puerto Rico in 1898, July 25th. General Miles is the person who invaded Puerto Rico, and if we look at General Miles, he is best known to be the slaughter of Native Americans here in this country. He was the leader of the slaughtering that they did against Native Americans. Then he went to Puerto Rico to invade us. Once they took us, they invaded us, they took the government that we had in existence, they took it over, and they declared martial law in Puerto Rico, which meant that Puerto Ricans could not come out of their house after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This created a whole sense of fear in Puerto Rico, and people, of course, that by the time that martial law was eradicated, that was 2 years later, they already did what they wanted to do, was to create any kind of sense of fear that anybody who would oppose the authority of the United States would be going to prison. And the people did oppose them coming, and since then we had political prisoners. They were, of course, arrested and put incarcerated. In 1917, as you all know, the Puerto Ricans come back and forth. That wasn't a choice by Puerto Ricans. In 1917, Puerto Ricans become American citizens, and that's against their will. Why against their will? Because the vote in Puerto Rico of the legislature in Puerto Rico for Puerto Rican citizenship was this many, 0. But since United States has the ultimate word in Puerto Rico, in 1917, they passed the Jones Act and they made us American citizens. Anybody who opposed, had to sign a green card in their own country. Now I bring this up because Puerto Rico is in a very big crisis now. The Jones Act came up because of these circumstances, and we can get into that later on, but I wanted you to understand when does the Jones Act comes to power is in 1917. The other ruling that's very big in Puerto Rico was the ruling of 1922. Because of the status of Puerto Rico, it was taken to the courts. The Supreme Court then decided the ultimate decision that today it still stands, that Puerto Rico belongs to, but it's not part of the United States. Therefore, just like I have this hat, just like I have, any kind of possessions, Puerto Rico is completely controlled by United States economically, politically, and socially. And therefore, we are not part of this country, but we are United States citizens. Due to the fact that the opposition to colonialism continued, at that time also in 1922 emerges probably the greatest Puerto Rican in the 20th century, which is Don Pedro Albizu Campos. This guy, Don Pedro Albizu Campos, went to Harvard University, had 2 doctorates, had a corporal master's, but he's also a military strategist. At that time, Don Pedro Albizu Campos actually believed in the United States and believed the freedom that they proclaimed, until he went to World War I as a lieutenant, and he thought he was going to become a military strategist, and unfortunately they put him exactly where the United States was. He wasn't going to be, he wasn't going to be in a point of leadership, and of course he was put with the people of color, because of segregation at that particular time, and he was treated very discriminatingly. That changes Don Pedro Albizu Campos completely. When he comes back, after he comes back and he finishes his degrees in Harvard and everything else, then he becomes that, and he develops a relationship with the Irish movement in Harvard, with the cadets of the Republic and the leadership of the Irish. Then he sees his vision of Puerto Rico, and he comes back to Puerto Rico and takes control of the Nationalist Party and implements many of the ideas that were taking place in Ireland for their independence. Ireland also happens to be a county. The six counties of Ireland are colonialized, and that is the longest colonial struggle in the world today. Second, of course, will be Puerto Rico. The biggest colony in the world, of course, is Puerto Rico. So when he comes back, he takes over the leadership and he starts a movement for Puerto Rican independence. Don Pedro Albizu Campos is a person that's very, very charismatic. When he speaks, people listen. And he had hundreds of thousands of people behind him. The United States saw that this was going to be a threat. So in the 1936, after Puerto Rico comes to a stage where the second most popular the figure of Don Pedro Albizu Campos advocating independence emerges with a great amount of support, the United States then needs to control this. And what they do is that they charge Don Pedro Albizu Campos and the leadership of the Puerto Rican of the Nationalist Party with seditious conspiracy. Now, it's very interesting the seditious conspiracy comes about in 1936. It's the first time that it's ever used in the United States, because no time has seditious conspiracy ever been used. And when does this law come about? This law comes about, seditious conspiracy, during the Civil War. And what is the Civil War? Youngsters, No, I see. This is very classic. I do this on purpose because one of the reasons that we have is that our young people do not know their history. And when you do not know your history, do you not know your conscience of who you are as human beings, especially Latinos and blacks. You know, the civil war is what happened at that time. And what's the Civil War?
The war between two nations.
And what was it for?
Slavery.
It was one group was against and one was for, right?
Yeah.
The North was what? For.
South
And the South was for save it, and the North. Okay. So seditious conspiracy comes about at that time that if any other would cross the line, all right, of the North and the South, they would be seditious. But it was never used against any time during the Civil War. The first time that it was used was in 1936. But I just mentioned a little while ago that in 1922, the Supreme Court said that Puerto Rico belongs to, but it's not part of the United States. But, it's not part of the United States. So how can Puerto Ricans be seditious? It's an impossibility. In Puerto Rico, it's called the impossible crime. You know, how can Puerto Ricans be seditious? We're not part of this country. In 1936, Don Pedro and the 7 leadership were incarcerated. They spent in prison almost 10 years. Don Pedro Rizo Campos comes around in 48 and then starts the movement against what's called Vieques at that time. He is the first one to come up with the whole situation of Vieques and the occupation of our island for military purposes in 1948. And that struggle continues on into way to the 2005. Again, afterwards, in 1948, the League of Nations is created, which is what today is known as the United Nations. They go over the list of colonial possessions, and they're all enumerated. Puerto Rico becomes part of that list. Note that colonialism is an international crime, but then United States now is in violation of an international crime, is colonialism. In order to hide that fact, United States then starts the movement in order to change the status of Puerto Rico and say that it's going to be a self-governing nation. So when they start this process in 1950, in response to that, 2 members of the Nationalist Party, Graciela Torresola and Oscar Collazo, go to the Blair House and try to kill President Truman in response to and let the world know that Puerto Rico continues to be a colony of the United States. In that particular incident, Torresola is killed instantly at that moment, and Oscar Collazo is wounded. He's taken to the hospital, he lives, but they give him the death penalty at that time. There is an international cry from the Puerto Ricans itself of a movement in order for Oscar Collazo not to be killed. And it got to the point where at that time there was very much influential people that it is known now that one of the persons that intervened in order for Oscar Collazo not to be killed was the Pope. Okay? And Truman does commute his sentence and he stays in prison. In 1953, United States, to cover the fact that Puerto Rico is a colony, passes what is called today Public Law 600. That is the creation of Estado Libre Asociado, or what it is, the Commonwealth. Now, in order for that to be passed, they gave the Puerto Ricans a constitution, told them write a constitution based on this. But the last analysis and the last person to ever cover to approve of it, of this constitution, was the United States. And if whatever was put in the constitution at that time, United States did not want it, they actually did take it out. In 1953, it's passed, and Puerto Rico becomes a Commonwealth and of the United States, in their words, or Estado Libre Asociado. One of the other things that they do at that particular time is they change the color of our flag. The flag that is popularly known in the United States and in Puerto Rico, the dark blue feel, I know they don't have it around here, that is not our flag. It has never been our flag, but United States imposed it on us in order for our flag to look similar to the United States flag. It took us years and decades because one of the things that they passed in order for us to use it was because prior to that, if you flew the Puerto Rican flag in Puerto Rico, or if you, right now that I'm talking to all of you right now about Puerto Rico, if it was the 1940s and 1950s, each and every one of you would have been in prison regardless of your age, and you would have been for just having the flag. Yeah. To mix what? What do you mean by mix? Huh?
Maybe Dominican and Puerto Rican.
Oh, Puerto Rican in the 50s, and you were talking about Puerto Rican independence, you still go to prison. It doesn't matter, you know. In Puerto Rico, it was called the Ley de la Mordaza. It's very similar to what's called, I know you don't, it's the Smith Law of the United States, which is done against communism in the 50s. But in Puerto Rico, if you ever talked about Puerto Rican independence, if you ever met for Puerto Rican independence, if you advocated anything of a change in Puerto Rico, or if you had the Puerto Rican flag in your house, you would go to prison. Thousands and thousands of people went to prison just for that.
One real quick thing is that also one thing we're not taught is that in the Caribbean in particular, there was a lot of exchange between Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, other Caribbean countries, also even between the solidarity of Latin America. Between, if you even look at like the Cuban Revolution, right? People meet in Mexico City. We're not really taught that because we're taught. So he's asking because he is mixed, right? He has like dual identity.
Yeah.
So whether you were Dominican and Puerto Rican, it didn't matter if you were in Puerto Rico. They were going to enforce the law in the same way. So that's why he's asking.
Louis. All right, so you will go to jail. So in 1953, the Public Law 600 passes. Okay. In order to tell the world that Puerto Rico is still a colony of the United States, in 1954, Lolita Lebron, with a commando of with three men, go into the Congress of the United States and they shoot it up, demanding Puerto Rican independence. Nobody in history has ever done that in the United States Congress, let alone go to Blair House and try to shoot the President of the United States for the cause of the Puerto Rican independence. So